One Lifetime with You. Written by Space Trek. Read by Arashi. Lysithea had never been more exhausted in her life, and she'd spent a lot of her life being exhausted. But this exhaustion, frustrating and limiting as it might be, was acceptable. She was free from her crests, free from her stunted lifespan, free from cruel fate itself, free to live, free to... Well, Lysithea looked over at her savior, asleep in an armchair near the faint remains of the fire, curled up like a cat, the man who'd saved her life. She smiled a little. Some knight in shining armor he was. Good thing she'd never wanted one of those anyway. Linhardt. Her voice was raspy. She'd been sleeping herself until about 2 minutes ago, but she had woken up and realized that there was something very important to be done before she allowed sleep to take her again. Linhardt. Linhardt stirred, blinking confusedly at the fire. He turned his gaze to Lysithea and looked fractionally more alert. Lysithea? Is something wrong? Come here. Linhardt made a grousing sort of noise in his throat, but came to Lysithea's side, concerned in spite of his weary annoyance. Her ridiculous heart felt warm right through at his odd devotion. Are you all right? Lysithea motioned him closer. Linhardt leaned down to hear her, but Lysithea wasn't talking. She grabbed him by the front of his tunic. It took all her strength to pull him down the rest of the way, but she got what she wanted, which was his mouth on hers. Linhardt made a startled sound, stumbling a little as he caught himself on the bed. Lysithea let him go, but he didn't move away, wide blue eyes inches from her face. Is that what you wanted? Linhardt sounded like his usual self, aside from his initial shock at her actions. He probably wasn't unduly surprised. This thing between them had been building for years now. He'd hinted, and more than hinted, since their school days. He wanted. She wanted. The question for Lysithea now was, what, precisely, did he want? She meant to find out. You're what I wanted. Her only wish was to have. Far be it from me to complain, Linhardt said, conversationally. But at this hour of the morning, Lysithea had no idea what time it was. Dark o'clock, as if she cared. I've waited long enough, she said. He smiled. This close, it was absolutely devastating. Well, he said, can't argue with that. He was the one to close the distance between them this time, bracing himself over Lysithea and her small mountain of pillows. This was a much better kiss. They were both a little clumsy, but Linhardt had tilted his head for a better angle, and he was reciprocating eagerly, and those alone were tremendous improvements. Lysithea startled when he caught her bottom lip with his tongue, but only a bit. She had precious little to do these past few months but read, and she might, perhaps, have slipped a few romance novels in with her textbooks and tomes of magical theory, for research purposes. She didn't want to go into this completely blind, after all. She was glad of it now. After a minute, maybe 2, Lysithea pulled away for a breath. Linhardt seemed to need breath himself. His chest was rising and falling far more quickly than usual, and he seemed very focused on her mouth. You're pretty good at that, he said, glowing praise from him. Lysithea silently commended herself on the research. You're not so bad yourself, she replied graciously. Linhardt coughed. Lysithea could make out the flush on his pale cheeks. It made her want to kiss him again. I admit, I did some reading on the subject. A great deal of it was weird and much more dull, but... He stopped at Lysithea's slightly hysterical giggle. I've been reading romance novels, she confessed. I thought... I should have some idea how to proceed. Linhardt looked very amused by this. Well, I'm glad to see we're both taking this seriously, he said. Seriously? Did that mean he wanted something serious? Something more? Maybe even... Oh, treacherous hope. She wanted more. She leaned up to kiss him again, wanting to push, to see what she could take and what he would give her. Lysithea took the lead and nudged him with her tongue. He yielded immediately, opening his mouth to her. It was rather strange. He tasted of sleep and the sorbet they'd shared last night. Tonight, Lysithea still had no idea what time it was, and he was very warm. Though the last one was normal, for him. When she drew her tongue back, he followed with his. He seemed much more confident about this whole kissing thing than she was. Maybe he'd had a better book. Maybe she should ask to borrow it. Lysithea felt his tongue catch on her left premolar, the one she'd cracked in a long-ago battle, and she pulled back. Are you cataloging my mouth? It came out far less demanding and far more breathless than she'd intended. Linhart blinked. That's not my primary goal, he offered, but it's not an unpleasant bonus. Bonus. Right. What is the primary goal? Making you happy, of course. Lysithia's face heated up at his sincerity, but he wasn't done. I plan to find everything that pleases you, if that is what you want. Treacherous hope, for once, might not be so treacherous. Though when had it been with him? He'd practically taught her how to hope, after all. Of course that's what I want. Something occurred to her. You want to know what pleases me? Certainly. Lysithia raised her chin. A lifetime of propriety and rigid self-discipline wasn't so easily undone, but the dark made it easier, as did the 6 years of close friendship and at least 3 of barely restrained desire. I'll give you one thing for free. Linhart leaned back a little. His eyes were bright and focused. He was willing to play along. So easily. I'm intrigued. Just this once. Lysithia looked away, suddenly shy. The irritation that followed this shyness. Shyness, honestly. She'd just had her tongue in his mouth, made her brave again. I'd like to see you with your hair down. Linhart blinked. Clearly he had not expected this. My hair? I've never seen you with it down, Lysithia said. You always wear it in a knot or a braid. It had been a silly, childish want of hers for years now. He had such lovely hair, long and well-kept, and he always wore it up. It was attractive that way, of course, but Lysithia had spent far too much time staring at it, tied behind his head or braided for sleep, and wondering what it would look like loose and down his back. Linhart was quiet for a moment. Lysithia forced herself to meet his eyes. There was no judgment, just mild curiosity and a helpless sort of affection that made her throat catch. I've seen you with your hair down enough, he said. I suppose it's only fair for me to return the favor. With that, he tugged at the faded ribbon he always wore, pulling it free. Lysithia only realized she was reaching to touch his hair after the deed was done. Linhart went still, surprised, and Lysithia forged ahead, gently combing out the remains of the knot from behind his head. You like my hair? Linhart sounded almost surprised by this. Lysithia rolled her eyes. I like you. I had gathered that much. Now he sounded faintly martyred. True romantics, the pair of them. I was confident enough you found me interesting. I just wasn't sure whether or not you were also attracted to me. Lysithia stopped her mindless finger-combing. Are you stupid? Oh, terrible start. She decided to compensate with honesty. I've been staring at you like some kind of pathetic, pining heroine for years. 5 moons ago you stopped spending evenings in my room with me, and I was certain it was because you caught me sneaking looks at your eyes while you researched. Linhart stared at her. Lysithia blushed. You were just running some time-consuming tests, but that's what I thought at the time, she mumbled. Linhart was smiling now, so she couldn't have messed up too badly. So you like my hair and my eyes, he said. That's what I said. Please try to catch up. He still hadn't grasped the truth of it, which was that she really, truly, stupidly, liked just about every part of him. She used to think she'd like a man with more obvious muscles, but Linhart's slender build had grown on her without conscious realization. His face, obviously, with its sharp lines and his clever hands and his quick smile. Yes, fine, all of it. Maybe someday he'd figure that out. Right now, unfortunately, Lysithia was starting to feel that all-consuming exhaustion again. Unbelievable. She'd just confessed her undying love for... Actually, did she really have to? Surely. But no, better to be safe than sorry. This was too important to leave to chance. She reached up to cup Linhart's jaw in her hand. I'm sure you figured this out by now, she said. But I love you. I'm in love with you. Linhart leaned his head into her palm. His attachment would likely be slight and nearly hidden to most people, but to Lysithia, who taught herself to read him the way she'd read any wonderful, complicated theory, it was nearly overwhelming. I love you as well. I have for a very long time, I think. Lysithia closed her eyes. You saved me. She heard him shift, felt him press his lips against her forehead. Selfishly, perhaps, I cared too much to let you go without a fight. And from Linhart, lackadaisical, pacifistic Linhart, this was perhaps the greatest declaration of love he could make. I'm about to pass out, Lysithia said. So it's definitely the wrong time to be saying this. But I want you to stay. You gave me a future, and I want to share it with you. All of it. She couldn't open her eyes against the drowsiness. Was this what Linhart felt all the time? but she heard him chuckle. "Are you proposing to me?" Lysithea turned her head blindly in his direction. "Will you say yes if I am?" "I'll propose to you myself if you're not." "Well, I am. I'm proposing. Marry me." "Done. We'll marry as soon as you're well. Now sleep, Lysithea. You need it." Lysithea felt Linhart move and was seized with sudden fear. She grabbed at him and missed. "Where are you going?" The movement stopped. "Nowhere. I was just getting comfortable." He settled close, curling his long body around hers. "You asked me to stay." And maybe it was that simple. Maybe love was staying, just because your love had asked it of you. Lysithea would have to think about it. Later, when she wasn't falling asleep. She had time to do it. She had him to do it with.